The electromagnetic pulse cannon. In the winter of 1968, beneath a nondescript warehouse complex in White Sands, New Mexico, a team of Air Force engineers activated a device that would fundamentally challenge the future of modern warfare. The prototype stood 15 feet tall, housed within a shielded chamber lined with copper mesh and grounded to bedrock 40 feet below. Its official designation was Project Blackout. Its purpose was to generate a controlled electromagnetic pulse, powerful enough to disable electronic systems across an entire metropolitan area without causing permanent damage to infrastructure or harm to human life. The lead scientist, Dr. Raymond Keller, had spent 7 years developing the theoretical framework. His approach differed from conventional EMP research, which relied on nuclear detonation side effects. Instead, Keller's system used a series of capacitor banks charged to unprecedented voltage levels, discharged in a precisely timed sequence through a helical antenna array. The result was a directional pulse that could be aimed, focused, and modulated with surgical precision. During the first full-scale test, conducted in a sealed valley surrounded by monitoring equipment, the device performed beyond all projections. Within a 3-second burst, every electronic device within a 12-mile radius ceased functioning. Military vehicles stalled mid-operation. Radio communications went silent. Radar screens flickered and died. Yet, when technicians examined the affected equipment hours later, they found no permanent damage. Everything could be restarted once the residual charge dissipated. Pentagon observers were simultaneously thrilled and terrified. The implications were staggering. A single device, deployable from aircraft or ships, could render an enemy's entire command infrastructure useless in seconds. No explosions, no casualties, just instant technological paralysis. But then the questions began. If the United States possessed this capability, what would prevent adversaries from developing it? What would happen to the trillion-dollar defense contracts built around missiles, tanks, and aircraft that suddenly became obsolete? Within 3 weeks of the successful test, Project Blackout was reclassified under a security level that officially didn't exist. The testing facility was evacuated and demolished. Dr. Keller was reassigned to a meteorological research station in Alaska, far from any strategic projects. His entire team was scattered across separate, unrelated programs. The prototype itself was reportedly dismantled, though no disposal records were ever found. Years later, a former Pentagon analyst claimed that both the United States and the Soviet Union had independently discovered similar EMP technologies around the same time. What followed was not an arms race, but a mutual agreement to bury the research entirely. The reasoning was chillingly pragmatic. A weapon that could end conflicts without destruction threatened the entire military-industrial ecosystem. Wars needed to be winnable, but costly. Technology that made conventional warfare pointless was simply too dangerous to exist. The warehouse in White Sands remains standing, though all records list it as abandoned since 1967. No explanation was ever given for the sudden termination of a project that had consumed millions in funding. And Dr. Keller, who died in 1983 under circumstances officially listed as natural causes, never spoke publicly about his work again. The particle beam destructor. In 1984, deep within the classified corridors of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a physicist named Dr. Helena Voss achieved what the Reagan administration had promised but never publicly delivered: a functional particle beam weapon capable of destroying incoming ballistic missiles at distances exceeding 200 miles. The project was buried within the sprawling Star Wars initiative, officially known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, but it operated under its own clandestine designation, Project Hellfire. The weapon worked by accelerating subatomic particles to near-light speed using a series of superconducting magnets arranged in a linear accelerator configuration. When fired, the beam traveled in a focused stream, delivering catastrophic kinetic energy to any target it contacted. Unlike laser weapons, which could be diffused by atmospheric conditions, particle beams were largely unaffected by weather, clouds, or electromagnetic interference. The breakthrough came during a test conducted at a remote facility in Nevada. A decommissioned ICBM casing was launched on a suborbital trajectory, simulating an attack profile. The particle beam tracked it flawlessly, locked onto the heat signature, and fired a 3-second burst. The missile disintegrated instantly, its fragments scattering harmlessly across the desert floor. Observers described the event as witnessing something from science fiction made real. Military leadership was stunned. The system had worked with near-perfect accuracy. If deployed, it would render nuclear deterrence obsolete. No missile could reach its target. No country could threaten another with atomic annihilation. The balance of power that had defined the Cold War for decades would collapse overnight. But within 48 hours, the mood shifted. Classified memos circulated among Pentagon officials and defense contractors. The concerns were not technical, they were economic and strategic. If missile defense became absolute, the entire nuclear arsenal became irrelevant. So did the bombers, submarines, and silos built to deliver it. Contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars would evaporate. The defense industry, which employed millions and sustained entire regions, would face catastrophic contraction. Then came the geopolitical calculation. If the United States deployed an impenetrable shield, the Soviet Union would be forced into an asymmetric response: terrorism, sabotage, unconventional warfare. The rules of engagement would destabilize unpredictably. Worse, if the technology leaked or was stolen, smaller nations or non-state actors could render superpowers defenseless. Project Hellfire was terminated in 1985. Official statements claimed technical challenges made the system impractical. But engineers who had worked on the project later described it as fully operational. Dr. Voss was quietly removed from her position and reassigned to a theoretical research role with no laboratory access. The particle beam apparatus was disassembled, and its components were scattered across multiple storage facilities, none of which kept complete records. In 1987, Voss died in a car accident on a remote stretch of highway in New Mexico. The crash was ruled driver error, but no autopsy was performed. Her research notes were never recovered. The facility where Hellfire was tested was repurposed for unrelated experiments, and all records of the 1,984 test were either destroyed or remain classified to this day. The Weather Manipulation Array. In 1976, inside a secure research compound near Fairbanks, Alaska, a team of atmospheric physicists completed construction of a device that could alter weather patterns across thousands of square miles. The system, known internally as Project Stormgate, utilized high-frequency radio waves transmitted into the ionosphere, heating specific layers of the atmosphere to create or dissipate storm systems, redirect jet streams, and even induce localized droughts or floods. The lead researcher, Dr. Marcus Oberlin, had theorized that by injecting energy into the ionosphere at precise frequencies, it was possible to manipulate atmospheric pressure gradients. His calculations suggested that with sufficient power and proper targeting, weather could be weaponized. A hurricane could be steered toward an enemy coastline. A drought could cripple agricultural regions. Rainfall could be denied to entire nations. The first operational test occurred in late 1977. Using a phased array of antennas generating over 10 gigawatts of focused radio energy, the team targeted a low-pressure system forming over the Gulf of Alaska. Within 18 hours, the storm intensified into a Category 3 equivalent and shifted trajectory by 40 degrees, moving directly toward a predetermined coastal zone that had been evacuated for the test. Meteorologists monitoring the event were baffled. The storm's behavior defied all conventional models. It accelerated, strengthened, and turned with uncanny precision. When the array was powered down, the system dissipated within hours. The evidence was undeniable. Weather could be controlled. Pentagon officials were briefed immediately. The implications were breathtaking. Wars could be won without firing a shot. Enemy nations could be starved, flooded, or frozen into submission. But as the excitement faded, a darker realization set in. If the United States deployed weather weapons, international law would be violated. The Environmental Modification Convention, signed just months earlier, explicitly banned such technology. More troubling, if other nations developed similar systems, the potential for catastrophic miscalculation was enormous. Within weeks, Project Stormgate was classified at a level reserved for nuclear secrets. Dr. Oberlin was instructed to cease all research and destroy his data. He refused, arguing that the technology could also be used for humanitarian purposes, ending droughts, dissipating hurricanes, stabilizing climates. His objections were ignored. In early 1978, the Fairbanks facility was quietly decommissioned. The antenna array was dismantled under the cover of a routine infrastructure upgrade. Dr. Oberlin was transferred to a university position far from any government lab. He attempted to publish his findings in civilian journals, but was blocked by national security orders. His manuscripts were confiscated. In 1981, Oberlin died of an apparent heart attack while hiking alone in the Cascade Mountains. No witnesses were present. His body was discovered days later. By then, all physical evidence of Project Stormgate had been erased. The facility's foundation was paved over. Records were either shredded or remain buried in compartmentalized archives that require clearances no civilian researcher has ever obtained. Decades later, rumors persist that weather manipulation technology was never truly abandoned, but instead transferred to black-budget programs operating under different names in different locations with no official acknowledgement. The sonic paralysis emitter. In 1981, at a classified testing ground in the Mojave Desert, a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency team unveiled a weapon that could immobilize human targets without inflicting permanent injury. The device, designated Project Silent Scream, emitted infrasound waves at frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, resonating with the body's internal organs and nervous system to induce instant paralysis. The system's core technology relied on phased acoustic emitters arranged in a parabolic dish configuration. When activated, the device generated a focused beam of low-frequency sound waves between 7 and 9 Hz frequencies known to interfere with heart rhythms, respiratory function, and neural activity. Subjects exposed to the beam reported immediate disorientation, loss of motor control, and an overwhelming sense of dread, followed by complete physical incapacitation. During controlled trials, volunteers positioned at ranges up to 50 meters were rendered unable to move within seconds. Their muscles locked. Speech became impossible. Some lost consciousness entirely. Medical monitoring confirmed that while the effects were temporary, they were absolute. No amount of training or willpower could overcome the neurological disruption. Military observers were astounded. The weapon offered a solution to one of warfare's most persistent challenges: subduing hostile forces without lethal force. It could clear buildings, disperse crowds, or disable enemy combatants with no risk of collateral damage. But the technology's perfection became its own undoing. Pentagon analysts recognized that if such a device became widely deployed, it would fundamentally alter the nature of conflict. Traditional infantry tactics would become obsolete. Soldiers could be neutralized without injury, creating complex legal and ethical dilemmas. Worse, if adversaries acquired the technology, U.S. forces would face the same vulnerability. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which had stabilized global conflict for decades, did not translate to non-lethal weapons. Then came the domestic implications. Law enforcement agencies expressed interest in deploying the system for riot control. But civil rights groups raised immediate alarms. A weapon that could paralyze crowds without visible harm opened terrifying possibilities for abuse. Protests could be silenced instantly. Dissent could be suppressed invisibly. The line between security and tyranny blurred beyond recognition. Within months, Project Silent Scream was shut down. Official statements cited health concerns and technical limitations, but engineers involved in the project later contradicted these claims. The system had worked flawlessly. Its cancellation was political, not technical. The lead scientist, Dr. Vincent Ruhr, was reassigned to an administrative role with no research responsibilities. The prototype emitter was dismantled, and all technical documentation was reclassified. The testing facility was repurposed for unrelated experiments. In 1985, Ruhr attempted to publish a sanitized version of his research in an acoustics journal. The article was rejected without review. Shortly thereafter, he received a formal warning from the Department of Defense, threatening prosecution under espionage laws if he disclosed any details of his work. Ruhr died in 1992 under circumstances that remain unclear. His death certificate listed pneumonia, but colleagues noted he had been in good health just days before. No autopsy was performed, and his personal files were seized by federal agents within hours of his death. The sonic paralysis technology vanished from official records entirely. No trace of Project Silent Scream appears in declassified documents. Yet, decades later, reports occasionally surface of similar systems being used in covert operations, always denied, never confirmed. The quantum communication system. In 1987, Inside a secure facility operated by the National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland, a team of cryptographers and quantum physicists achieved what had long been considered theoretically possible but practically unattainable: a communication system that was fundamentally immune to interception, decryption, or jamming. The project, known as Operation Cipher Ghost, utilized quantum entanglement to transmit information in a way that any attempt at eavesdropping would immediately collapse the signal, alerting both sender and receiver. The breakthrough came from Dr. Evelyn Strauss, a physicist who had spent years exploring the practical applications of quantum mechanics. Her system employed pairs of entangled photons generated in a controlled laboratory environment. When one photon's state was measured, its entangled partner instantly reflected that measurement, regardless of distance. By encoding information into these quantum states, secure communication became possible across any range without the need for traditional encryption keys. During initial tests, the system transmitted classified data between two locations separated by over 300 miles. Every attempt by NSA red teams to intercept or decode the transmissions failed. The quantum states collapsed upon observation, rendering the intercepted data meaningless while simultaneously alerting the legitimate users that a breach attempt had occurred. Military and intelligence leaders recognized the implications immediately. If deployed, the system would render all existing signals intelligence capabilities obsolete. Spy agencies worldwide relied on intercepting and decoding communications. Quantum entanglement communication would eliminate that advantage entirely. For the United States, this meant unprecedented security. But it also meant adversaries would be driven to develop the same technology, nullifying the strategic edge. Then came the economic consideration. The defense and intelligence communities had invested billions in cryptographic infrastructure satellites, decryption supercomputers, entire agencies dedicated to signals intelligence. Quantum communication would render all of it obsolete overnight. Contracts would be canceled. Facilities would close. Thousands of jobs would disappear. Worse still, if the technology became commercialized, secure communication would be available to anyone: corporations, criminals, terrorists. The ability to monitor global communications, a cornerstone of national security strategy, would vanish. Intelligence agencies would be blinded. Within weeks of the successful test, Operation Cipher Ghost was reclassified at a level requiring special presidential authorization to access. Dr. Strauss was informed that her work would not be published, patented, or discussed outside of a compartmentalized group cleared for the program. She protested, arguing that the technology had civilian applications that could revolutionize global communications. Her objections were dismissed. In 1988, the project was officially terminated. The quantum entanglement generators were dismantled, and all technical documentation was placed in a vault, accessible only to a handful of officials. Dr. Strauss was reassigned to a teaching position at a university with no research lab and no access to classified materials. She attempted to recreate her work using civilian resources but found herself blocked at every turn. Funding applications were denied. Equipment orders were delayed indefinitely. Colleagues who had worked with her on Cipher Ghost refused to speak about the project, citing non-disclosure agreements. In 1993, Strauss died in a house fire. Investigators ruled it accidental, caused by faulty wiring, but neighbors reported seeing unmarked vehicles near her home in the days before the fire. No evidence of her quantum research survived the blaze. Decades later, quantum communication remains a theoretical curiosity in public science, with researchers claiming they are close to a breakthrough. Yet, those familiar with Operation Cipher Ghost know the breakthrough happened over 30 years ago and was deliberately erased. The Total Missile Defense Grid. In 1983, during the height of Cold War tensions and the unveiling of President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, a separate, even more classified program achieved what Star Wars only promised: a missile defense system with a verified 100% interception rate. The project, codenamed Operation Sentinel Shield, combined ground-based railguns, orbital kinetic interceptors, and predictive AI algorithms decades ahead of their time. The system was developed by a joint team from Lockheed's Skunk Works division and a shadowy DARPA contractor operating out of a facility in the Nevada desert. The lead engineer, Dr. Benjamin Cross, had pioneered a radical approach to missile defense that didn't rely on explosive warheads or fragile tracking systems. Instead, His interceptors used electromagnetically launched tungsten projectiles traveling at hypersonic speeds, guided by an artificial intelligence system capable of predicting missile trajectories with near-perfect accuracy. The first full test occurred in early 1984. Multiple ICBM-class targets were launched from various locations, simulating a coordinated nuclear strike. Sentinel Shield tracked every missile simultaneously, calculated optimal interception points, and deployed kinetic interceptors from both ground installations and low-orbit platforms. Every single target was destroyed before reaching its apex. The success rate was flawless. Defense officials observing the test were initially euphoric. The holy grail of strategic defense had been achieved. Nuclear weapons, the ultimate deterrent, could now be negated entirely. The United States would be invulnerable. But, as the initial excitement faded, the implications became deeply troubling. If the U.S. possessed an impenetrable shield, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction would collapse. The Soviet Union would be forced into a corner, their entire nuclear arsenal rendered useless. The strategic balance that had prevented World War III for decades would shatter. Moscow would face an impossible choice: accept permanent strategic inferiority or pursue asymmetric warfare strategies, cyber attacks, biological weapons, terrorism that couldn't be stopped by railguns. Worse, the existence of Sentinel Shield would trigger an arms race unlike any before. Every nation would scramble to develop similar systems or countermeasures. The global stability maintained through fear of mutual annihilation would be replaced by unpredictable chaos. Then came the internal assessment from the defense industry. The system worked too well. If deployed, it would eliminate the need for ballistic missile submarines, silo-based ICBMs, and bomber fleets. Contracts worth trillions of dollars over decades would vanish. Entire military branches would be restructured. The economic disruption would be catastrophic. Within months, Operation Sentinel Shield was quietly terminated. Official records listed it as a failed experiment, plagued by technical challenges and cost overruns. But engineers who worked on the project tell a different story. The system was fully operational. Its cancellation was political and economic, not technical. Dr. Cross was reassigned to a civilian aerospace firm with no defense contracts. The AI system that had made Sentinel Shield possible was allegedly destroyed, though some believe it was secretly preserved in a compartmented archive. The orbital platforms were never launched. The ground-based railguns were dismantled and buried in classified storage. In 1989, Dr. Cross died in a plane crash while traveling to a conference. The aircraft went down in clear weather, with no distress call. Investigators found no mechanical defects. The crash was ruled pilot error, despite the pilot's spotless 20-year record. No mention of Operation Sentinel Shield appears in any declassified document. The technology that could have ended the threat of nuclear war was buried, and with it, the man who created it, the portable nuclear neutralizer. In 1979, at Los Alamos National Laboratory, a radiological physicist named Dr. Alan Mercer developed a device that challenged one of the fundamental assumptions of the nuclear age, that once a nuclear weapon was armed, it could not be safely disarmed without access to its internal mechanisms. Mercer's invention, officially designated the containment field disruptor, could render nuclear warheads inert from a distance by disrupting the precisely timed detonation sequence required for a critical chain reaction. The device worked by generating a targeted electromagnetic pulse, tuned to interfere with the electronic triggering mechanisms inside modern nuclear weapons. Unlike conventional EMP weapons that disabled all electronics indiscriminately, Mercer's system used narrowband frequency modulation to target only the specific circuits responsible for initiating fission. When activated near a nuclear device, it introduced microsecond delays into the firing sequence, preventing the implosion symmetry necessary for detonation. The first test involved a decommissioned W-87 warhead placed in a shielded chamber. The containment field disruptor was activated from 50 meters away. Diagnostic equipment confirmed that the warhead's trigger circuits experienced cascading failures, rendering detonation impossible. The warhead remained structurally intact but functionally useless. Military observers immediately grasped the implications. A portable device that could neutralize nuclear weapons would revolutionize counterproliferation efforts. Terrorist dirty bombs could be rendered harmless. Rogue state arsenals could be neutralized covertly. The nightmare scenario of nuclear terrorism could be mitigated entirely. But as the initial enthusiasm subsided, darker concerns emerged. If such technology became widely known, nuclear deterrence would lose all credibility. Nations could no longer trust that their arsenals would function when needed. The strategic stability built on the certainty of nuclear retaliation would crumble. More troubling was the asymmetric advantage it created. Whichever nation possessed the neutralizer first would gain an overwhelming edge, able to disarm adversaries while maintaining its own arsenal. The temptation for preemptive action would become irresistible. The Cold War, already teetering on the edge of catastrophe, would be pushed into uncharted territory. Then came the intelligence assessment. If the technology fell into the wrong hands, hostile governments, terrorist organizations, even criminal syndicates, the consequences would be catastrophic. A device capable of disabling nuclear weapons could be used to extort nuclear powers or enable attacks that would otherwise be deterred by the threat of massive retaliation. Within weeks of the successful test, the containment field disruptor program was classified at a level above top secret. Dr. Mercer was ordered to cease all research and turn over every document, blueprint, and prototype. He complied, but privately expressed concerns that the technology was too important to suppress. In 1980, Mercer's laboratory was closed under the pretext of budgetary constraints. All equipment was removed, and the facility was repurposed for unrelated research. Mercer himself was transferred to a teaching position at a university with no access to classified materials or advanced laboratories. He attempted to continue his research independently but faced insurmountable obstacles. Funding requests were denied. Equipment suppliers refused to sell him necessary components. Colleagues who might have assisted distanced themselves, citing vague warnings from government officials. In 1984, Mercer died in what was officially ruled a suicide. He was found in his home with a gunshot wound to the head. No note was left. Friends and family insisted he had shown no signs of depression. An investigation was conducted but quickly closed. The containment field disruptor vanished from all official records. No patent was filed. No technical papers were published. The technology that could have neutralized the threat of nuclear weapons disappeared as if it had never existed. The neural frequency disruptor. In 1985, inside a secure research facility operated by the U.S. Army's Medical Research Institute of Chemical Defense, a neurologist named Dr. Sarah Kinnear completed work on a device that could remotely influence human brain activity using precisely modulated electromagnetic fields. The system, designated Project Mindstorm, could induce specific cognitive and emotional states in targeted individuals without their awareness or consent. The technology exploited the fact that human brain activity operates on measurable electrical frequencies. By broadcasting external signals that resonated with these natural frequencies, it was possible to influence neural activity. Kinnear's breakthrough was developing a system that could target specific brain regions with surgical precision, inducing anything from mild disorientation to complete incapacitation. During controlled tests, subjects exposed to the device exhibited dramatic behavioral changes. Low-frequency emissions induced lethargy and suggestibility. Mid-range frequencies caused anxiety and confusion. High-frequency bursts triggered panic or aggression. In every case, subjects had no awareness that their mental states were being externally manipulated. Military planners immediately recognized the tactical applications. Enemy forces could be rendered combat ineffective without a shot being fired. Crowds could be dispersed without physical force. Hostile leaders could be influenced during negotiations. The potential for psychological warfare was unprecedented, but the ethical implications were catastrophic. The technology represented a fundamental violation of human autonomy. It could be used for interrogation, coercion, or outright mind control. Worse, because the effects were invisible and left no physical evidence, its use would be impossible to detect or prove. Intelligence officials raised additional concerns. If adversaries developed similar systems, American personnel would be equally vulnerable. Diplomats could be influenced during critical negotiations. Military commanders could be manipulated during conflicts. The very concept of free will would be called into question. Then came the domestic considerations. Law enforcement agencies expressed interest in using the device for crowd control and suspect interrogation. But civil liberties organizations warned that such technology in the hands of government would enable unprecedented authoritarian control. Protests could be ended by broadcasting fear. Dissidents could be silenced by inducing despair. Within months, Project Mindstorm was terminated. Dr. Kinnear was informed that her research would be classified indefinitely and that all prototypes and documentation would be seized. She objected, arguing that the technology could also be used therapeutically to treat mental illness and neurological disorders. Her appeals were ignored. The research facility was closed in 1986. All equipment was removed and reportedly destroyed. Dr. Kinnear was reassigned to a position with no research responsibilities and no access to advanced laboratories. She signed extensive non-disclosure agreements under threat of prosecution. In 1991, Kinnear died in a car accident. Witnesses reported that her vehicle suddenly veered off the road without braking. Investigators found no mechanical defects. The crash was ruled driver error, though Kinnear had no history of reckless driving. No evidence of Project Mindstorm appears in any declassified document. The technology that could remotely influence human consciousness vanished entirely from official records. The Orbital Energy Beam Platform. In 1988, a collaborative effort between the Department of Defense and NASA resulted in the successful deployment of a prototype orbital weapons platform capable of delivering concentrated energy beams to targets anywhere on Earth with pinpoint accuracy. The system, codenamed Operation Skyfire, represented the culmination of decades of research into directed energy weapons and orbital mechanics. The platform consisted of a constellation of satellites equipped with high-energy lasers and particle beam emitters powered by nuclear reactors. Each satellite could focus its beam on targets as small as a vehicle, delivering enough energy to melt steel, ignite explosives, or disable electronic systems. The orbital positioning allowed for global coverage, with response times measured in minutes. The first operational test occurred over the Pacific Ocean. A decommissioned naval vessel was designated as the target. Within seconds of receiving the firing command, the satellite's beam locked onto the ship and fired. The vessel's bridge melted instantly, followed by a catastrophic secondary explosion as fuel tanks ignited. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Military officials were astounded by the weapon's effectiveness. It offered unprecedented strategic reach. No target anywhere on the planet would be safe. Missile silos, command bunkers, aircraft carriers, all could be destroyed within moments of being identified. The platform could also serve defensive roles, destroying incoming missiles or hostile satellites. But the implications were deeply destabilizing. If the United States deployed orbital weapons, other nations would be forced to respond. The militarization of space would accelerate dramatically. Treaties prohibiting space-based weapons would collapse. The fragile balance of power would shatter. Worse, the system's very existence would provoke preemptive action. Adversaries might conclude that their only option was to strike before the platform became operational. The risk of miscalculation leading to nuclear war would increase exponentially. Then came the technical concern. Orbital platforms were inherently vulnerable. A single anti-satellite weapon could destroy them. Once deployed, they would become prime targets, turning space into an active battlefield. The cascading effects of debris from destroyed satellites could render entire orbital regions unusable for decades. Within weeks of the successful test, Operation Skyfire was classified at the highest levels. The satellite prototypes were reportedly deorbited and allowed to burn up in the atmosphere. All technical documentation was sealed. Engineers who worked on the project were reassigned to unrelated positions and required to sign lifetime non-disclosure agreements. The lead scientist, Dr. Marcus Holt, was transferred to a civilian research institution with no defense contracts. He attempted to publish sanitized versions of his work on orbital mechanics but was blocked by national security orders. In 1994, Holt died of an apparent heart attack while jogging. He was 47 years old with no history of cardiac problems. No autopsy was performed at the family's request, though colleagues later noted that the family had been visited by government officials shortly before his death. No record of Operation Skyfire appears in any declassified archive. The technology that could have given the United States absolute military dominance was erased from history: the instant tunneling machine. In 1982, at a classified facility operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a team of geologists and mechanical engineers developed a revolutionary tunneling system that could bore through solid rock at speeds previously thought impossible. The device, designated the Subterranean Rapid Access System, used a combination of high-frequency vibration, plasma cutting, and immediate structural stabilization to create underground passages at rates exceeding 50 meters per hour. The technology worked by first liquefying rock using focused plasma torches heated to temperatures exceeding 10,000 degrees Celsius. The molten material was then displaced by hydraulic pressure while simultaneously being fused into a glass-like lining that eliminated the need for traditional support structures. The entire process occurred in a continuous cycle, allowing the machine to advance steadily without pausing for reinforcement. During field tests in Nevada, the system successfully created a tunnel network spanning over 2 kilometers in less than 48 hours. The resulting passages were structurally sound, perfectly cylindrical, and capable of supporting heavy vehicle traffic immediately upon completion. Engineers described the achievement as transformative. Military planners immediately recognized the strategic value. The system could create hardened command bunkers in days rather than years. Underground supply routes could be established to protect logistics from aerial attack. Entire military bases could be relocated beneath the earth, immune to conventional weapons. But the implications extended beyond defense. If such technology became widely available, it would revolutionize infrastructure development. Subway systems could be built in weeks. Underground cities could house millions. The entire paradigm of construction and urban planning would be overturned. Then came the realization that such rapid tunneling capability posed severe security risks. Adversaries could use it to breach borders undetected, infiltrate secure facilities, or bypass defensive fortifications. The technology that promised impregnable defense also enabled perfect infiltration. Intelligence officials raised additional concerns. If hostile nations acquired the system, they could create vast underground networks for weapons storage, troop movement, and command centers that would be nearly impossible to detect or destroy. The strategic balance would shift unpredictably. Within months, the Subterranean Rapid Access System program was terminated. The prototype machine was disassembled, and all technical documentation was classified. The tunnels created during testing were deliberately collapsed and filled with concrete. The lead engineer, Dr. Robert Fenton, was reassigned to a civilian infrastructure project with no access to advanced technologies. He attempted to patent a simplified version of the system but was blocked by national security provisions. In 1987, Fenton died in an industrial accident while inspecting a conventional tunnel boring machine. Investigators ruled it an equipment malfunction, though safety inspectors had certified the machine as operational just days before. No trace of the Subterranean Rapid Access System appears in any public or declassified document. The technology that could have revolutionized both warfare and civilian construction vanished entirely. Conclusion: these 10 technologies, spanning electromagnetic weapons to tunneling systems, form a pattern far more disturbing than their individual disappearances suggest. Each represented a breakthrough so profound that its existence threatened to destabilize not just military strategy, but the entire economic and political infrastructure built around conventional warfare. What connects these cases is not merely suppression, but systematic erasure, a coordinated effort by government agencies, military contractors, and intelligence organizations to ensure that certain technologies never reach operational deployment or public awareness. The scientists behind these projects weren't simply reassigned. They were isolated, silenced, and in many cases, died under circumstances that defy statistical probability. The official explanations, technical failures, cost overruns, impracticality crumble under scrutiny. Engineers who worked on these projects consistently report that the systems functioned exactly as designed. The cancellations were not due to failure, but to success. These technologies worked too well, and that was the problem. Consider the underlying motivation. The global military-industrial complex generates trillions of dollars through continuous arms development, production, and deployment. This ecosystem requires ongoing conflict, managed tensions, and incremental technological advancement. A weapon that ends wars permanently or renders entire categories of military hardware obsolete doesn't just disrupt the market, it threatens to collapse it entirely. The electromagnetic pulse cannon that could disable cities without destruction, the particle beam that could stop all missiles, the weather manipulation array that could cripple nations without invasion, each of these represented a leap so dramatic that the existing power structures couldn't absorb it. The system wasn't designed to accommodate revolutionary change. It was designed to prevent it. There's also the geopolitical calculation. Many of these technologies were so destabilizing that both superpowers agreed, tacitly or explicitly, to suppress them. The Cold War operated on a paradoxical stability. Mutual vulnerability ensured mutual restraint. Technologies that broke this balance, whether by providing absolute defense or invisible offense, threatened to trigger the very conflicts they were meant to prevent. What's been lost is immeasurable. Clean energy beam systems, instant infrastructure, perfect missile defense, mental health treatments, communication systems immune to surveillance. Each suppressed technology represented not just military capability, but civilian applications that could have transformed society. The tunneling machine could have revolutionized transportation. The quantum communication system could have made global privacy achievable. The weather manipulation array could have ended droughts. But perhaps the most troubling aspect is the continuing pattern. These cases span decades, crossing multiple administrations and geopolitical eras, yet the suppression mechanism remains consistent. This suggests an institutional structure, formal or informal, dedicated to controlling technological advancement according to strategic and economic criteria rather than human benefit. The scientists who disappeared, the facilities demolished, the records erased all point to a system that prioritizes control over progress. And if this pattern held true from the 1,960 seconds through the 1,990 seconds, there's no reason to believe it has stopped. How many more technologies have been developed and buried in the decades since? How many are being suppressed right now? The tragedy isn't just what was lost, but what continues to be denied. Somewhere in classified vaults, sealed under security levels that officially don't exist, may lie the keys to solving humanity's greatest challenges: energy, disease, conflict, scarcity. But as long as those solutions threaten existing power structures, they will remain locked away. These 10 technologies didn't fail. They succeeded. And that success was considered too dangerous for the world to witness.